Thank you for listening to Steel Roses, a podcast for women by women. My name is Jenny.
And I'm Melissa, and we're here to bring you inspiring content in a space where we can still be real about the everyday challenges for women. Cousins, so before jumping into our first full topic, I think we should explain what this podcast is and who it's for. I admit I'm a podcast listener, and if you look, there's a lot of working mom podcasts out there. There's a lot of podcasts for professional women, for the female executive, podcasts that target women's mental health, but there's really not a lot of podcasts out there tackling a variety of these topics and how they interact with one another. And I think women are dealing with these issues not neatly compartmentalized, but we're sort of kind of at the intersection of these things, you know?
Right, exactly. And again, as Melissa mentioned, we actually both listen to other podcasts. So we know there's tons of podcasts out there, but why this one? Why is this one important? We really want to provide relatable information. We're not experts. We're not, with the stars, like we don't have nannies or maids or, I'm going to pause for a minute because if I could, I would. I've said it.
More power to you if you have it.
Can't wait to be able to do that. I'm going to be honest. Personal chef, I'm all in. But we do want to provide relatable content to everybody. We want everyone to feel like this is a place for me and I can relate to these people and this information. This podcast is going to be based on real life experiences, real life challenges. And, we're not experts. We're not healthcare professionals. We really are just striving to bring you information to show you that you're not in this alone. We're all in this together. And on that note, we also want to create a safe space. This podcast, we hope that for everyone that listens, they come away from this podcast feeling like I've got this. I hear these women talking and I know what they're going through and I can relate to this. And this podcast makes me feel good afterwards because it's something that I'm hearing and it makes me feel like I'm not alone. And that's really what we want everyone to take away from this.
Exactly. And we will, like we said, we are not experts on every topic that we talk about. We're going to bring in factual information, or we'll bring in the experts themselves and help explain the experiencings that we're sharing, and help us understand these everyday issues, just like our listeners would. So that's exactly what we're trying to do here. Make something that's relatable that the average sort of woman is facing. All right. So with all that said, now let's get into it. So cousin, one of my closest friends, as you know, just had her first baby. And about 2 weeks in, she called me and she was like, how is this so hard? And she said it twice. How is this so hard? And it really made me flash back to that first month that my daughter was born. And I remember just one night laying in bed, looking at the ceiling and thinking, wow, I completely underestimated what motherhood was going to be like. And then my secondary thought was, will I ever be alone for a minute again?
No, never.
And that transition was a bit of a shock to me. So I was right in the middle of my PhD. I just finished my independent research and I was in the beginning stages of writing. So that's the point where you have to be crazy self-sufficient and independent in order to progress, right, in the program. And they went from that to boom, having this tiny little person reliant on me 24/7 and having to be with someone else 24/7. And it really did take me a little bit of time to get a handle on that shift,
I think that that's very normal for a lot of moms and a lot of women experience that, but just don't really talk about it. Probably because it's just not talked about in a really public forum kind of way. Part of the challenge of the transition to motherhood is the expectations we have going into it. And if you don't meet those expectations, you ultimately just feel like a failure. That's it. You feel like you failed while you're pregnant and even way before you get pregnant. growing up in our society today, there's all these notions about being a mom and having a baby, and the pictures and the media really paint this really glossy, positive butterflies and sunshine image about what it's like. So essentially, you get two options when you're seeing what a mother is like. You're either the glossy, positive, euphoric person who wears stilettos and didn't gain any baby weight. And you're like,
It
just,
always has a smile on her
yeah,
face.
is always smiling and happy. Or you're like hot mess express and you can't take care of yourself. Kids are a mess. Babies are crying. It's terrible.
You're crying.
But the thing that like always troubles me, and the thing that actually comes to mind a lot for me personally, like when I see these things, is like, okay, that's, I get it. It's funny. It's comical. This is why they're presenting it this way. In none of these images in media, in movies, nobody addresses mental health challenges after giving birth. Well, no, it's not fun to talk about that. It's not funny. But that's a huge part of what women deal with after expanding their families. And because no one talks about it, it is unexpected. And the impact is a lot stronger because you just weren't prepared for it.
Yes. No, exactly. You hit the nail on the head. So, okay, wait. What were the top 3 things that you were told about motherhood before having your first? And then I'll tell you mine.
Where do I begin? Okay. So here I actually have a couple here. So, number one, now you have a real purpose to fulfill in life. And everyone who's listening, who knows me, and if you don't know me, you will eventually get to know me, saying something like that is like vinegar coming out of my mouth because I'm like the exact opposite of that notion. Number 2 is you will not miss your pre-baby life, which I don't know where that comes from. Number 3 is read the baby books and you will feel totally prepared. And I'm going to be honest, I fell for that one like a bag of rocks. And I just really, and I used to wax philosophical on how to take care of babies and what my method was going to be. And that went out the window within the first like 10 minutes. Like, I'm going to be real here.
Survival, right?
Basically, yeah.
Everything.
It's my motto. And number 4 for me, and this one's loaded. So we're going to dig into this. Your relationship with your partner won't be affected. And if anything, having a baby will bring you closer together. Now,
yes.
I know that's a volatile one. That's a volatile one. I know not everyone will feel the same way, but that's the whole point. We don't think everyone's going to feel this way, and no one's, we are not expecting that everyone will agree with us, but we want to get the information out on the table. Melissa, what about you?
Okay, yeah. Probably the top sort of, expectations that I had about motherhood based on what I heard from others was, number 1, this magical state of motherhood that you will immediately fall in love with your new life, and everything's sort of going to be this mystical type of atmosphere that it's happening in the moment. Number 2, that breastfeeding is simple. That this notion that your body will innately know what to do once you have a baby. Yeah, no, that was not my experience, and that probably set me up for some postpartum anxiety. So
I bet.
And then number 3, being a work at home mom makes things easier. Jenny, you and I both work sort of non-traditional jobs in the sense that, it's not an office 9 to 5. So that one I was like, oh, I'll be set. I'll be ready for this. So yeah, those were the top 3 probably for me that set up my expectations about what motherhood was going to be like.
Let's take a quick break.
Are you interested in podcasting but not sure where to start? My name is Jenny Benitez, and I'm here to help guide you through your podcast launch and maintenance. Check out the link in the episode description for Podcasting Unboxed, your comprehensive startup guide. I am very excited to work with you. So there's a lot here. Clearly, this could be a two-parter or a topic that we come back to in the future, because there's a couple things here that we would definitely want to discuss. But we can just take some time to dispel a few of these now. Let's pick our top three and just kind of dig into them. I'm gonna pick one. So, Melissa, this one actually was a big one for me. Did you feel an immediate bond with your baby right after birth?
Yes, the immediate bond. Short answer, no. At least not how it's portrayed in the movies and on television. It was funny because I think it was like a month in, and my college roommate reached out to me, and she was like, how are you doing? How's the baby? How are things going? And at first I remember just sort of putting on this facade, and I was like, oh, everything is great, things are good, I have a handle on it. And I remember her just pausing and being like, Melissa, is me, you could be honest. And I remember just breaking down a little bit and being like, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And she was like, let me just stop you right there. She's like, let me tell you my experience. And she did. She laid out sort of this timeline. She was like, listen, for the first 2 months, I did not feel a crazy strong connection with my child. She was like, I got no sleep. I was up all night, and she was like, I really didn't like him. And then she's like, but it starts to shift. She's like, at 3 months, you start to feel things growing. And then she's like, at 6 months, you start to get into this groove. And she's like, they start expressing themselves a lot more. And she's like, you just sort of develop this bond over time. And she's like, by 9 months, she's like, I was completely in love with my kid, and I couldn't imagine not having him. And she's like, it still didn't mean that he didn't drive me crazy at times, but she's like, it shifted. And, Jenny, not for nothing, but it was pretty on point for me. Like at 3 months, I started to get into a groove. By 6 months, I really started to feel bonded with my daughter. And then by 9 months, I was like, damn, like I'm in love with this. I'm in love with this kid. But I think there's a difference. And I didn't realize that until after I went through the newborn stage, is that you can absolutely love your child and not be in love with motherhood, not instantaneously. It takes a little bit while to get into that groove. And I think it took, like a little while for me to both be in love with my baby and then also start to love motherhood in the way that it's portrayed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get it. I totally get it.
What was your experience?
Well, as I quickly discovered, and which you saw because you were at the hospital with me, is that I'm a very much of a realist mom.
Yes.
As much as I had notions of what kind of mother I would be, I very quickly adapted to what was real. I love my kids. Like any mother, that feeling is infinite, it's unending. But at first meeting of this tiny person who kept me up all night, cried a lot, ate, threw up all over me pretty consistently, and then slept, I really didn't like them very much. I'm going to be honest. And I say that with the most love in my heart, because you can 110% love someone, but not like them in the moment. You don't have to like everyone all the time. These are my children. I love them, but I don't always like them. And this comment I'm making it, and I'm putting it out there because I really want to highlight that this is one of those isms that we want to really change the conversation around this. It's okay to bring your baby home and be scared. It's okay to bring your baby home and not love being a mom. That one's totally fine. And it's okay to bring your baby home and feel resentful. That happens. We all feel that, but I don't think anyone talks about it.
No one says it out loud.
I very distinctly remember after the twins were born, I have twin girls, after they were born. I was sitting on the couch, really a mess, no sleep, bottle feeding, up all night. And Melissa came in the morning, freshly showered, did not smell like puke, and was like, "Good morning. How are the babies?" And I was like, "You better take that cheerfulness out the door as we're
Get
trying
out
to
of
get out of my trying to get
get
out of
out
my
of my
face." Now, to be fair, let me back up because I'm not a jerk, everybody. But to be fair, there's a lot of factors to consider with that. It's not just it's not just cut and dry. It's not black and white. Um, an example something I want to bring up, not an example, something I really want to talk about is the real hormonal changes after you give birth. Now, for me, no one talked about hormonal changes or fallout after you give birth. You're handed your baby and you're wheeled out of the hospital, and you don't really have any guidance from anybody on what to be aware of for your own physical and mental health needs after giving birth. And this applies to C-sections and natural birth. Our bodies have natural methods to childbirth. And, I'm only going to focus on the hormone portion here. There's a lot of other things we can discuss, and which we will. Some of the research I did, referencing National Library of Medicine at childbirth and directly after, your endorphin levels are off the charts. It's meant to make the mother alert. It's also meant to make the mother feel euphoric after birth, be more attentive. And in that very early postpartum period, the endorphins with the oxytocin, they play a role in strengthening the mother-infant relationship. So it's just something that biologically is necessary. Our bodies put that into play for us, which is great. But then you go home and reality hits. The endorphins wear off, and you might not be alone with a tiny person, but now you have a tiny person that you have to care for, and the dishes are piling up, and everything's kind of a mess, and it's all on your plate. There was an article on parents.com, I think a couple years back, that discussed this, and every woman is going to go through this differently and going to experience this differently. But the research I found suggested that at about 6 months postpartum, your hormones will begin to regulate. Now, that's not everybody. That's just a mild time frame there. They're making this suggestion, but once your hormones begin to balance back out, you're, gonna start to feel better supposedly. But even if your hormones are balancing back out, well, now you're sleep deprived. You're worried about your baby. You're trying to find a rhythm with your new life. In some instances, you're dealing with your child being sick, which I had that situation on my hands. And Melissa, I think you had a situation on your hands too, that you're going to get into a little bit. Um, you know, and then outside of, caring for your child, some women have to worry about whether they even have adequate maternity leave. There's a lot that is there for women to have to deal with. And, it's there's not a lot of support from our society. We don't put that support in place, and it's not right. And it's just all on our shoulders. So yes, of course, there's going to be a lot that you're dealing with directly thereafter, and even for the first few years. This is not a situation, it's not a forum where I'm going to make any kind of recommendations on treatments or anything like that. I'm not a healthcare professional. What I want to say here is that if you are experiencing distress or feel like you're just not yourself after childbirth, if you have that gut feeling that something is off, you have to be your own advocate. You have to go and demand support from your doctor. Don't be ashamed of turning to your circle of support from your family or your friends for help. If you do any research before you have a child, it really should also include what happens to your body after giving birth and what you can proactively do to support yourself. Because in the end, you really have to be able to get through this and make it happen. So that's really something that I want to put out there to everybody. A big component is making sure that you have the knowledge to help yourself out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, our podcast is just one small outlet, but I think it adds up, the more women are talking about this, the more women will hear about it. And the more I think it becomes normalized to have these conversations. And I think both you and I would have been better prepared if if more public forums were talking about this. And I think it also speaks to these immediate postpartum care myths. You constantly hear your body knows exactly what to do. Just let it happen. After your 6-week checkup, everything's going to be right back to normal. Your pre-pregnancy body will bounce right back. And my favorite, breastfeeding is natural. Instinctually, you'll know what to do. Can I please tell you how much anxiety that caused me as a new mom and the guilt I felt because I felt like I had no idea what I was doing. So in case you didn't know, cousin, which brings us into one of our dispelling another myth, is that breastfeeding has made a serious comeback right now. So when we were growing up, breastfeeding rates were pretty different. So plugging CDC statistics here, about 55% of women initiated breastfeeding in the 80s, and approximately 16% of women were exclusively breastfeeding at 6 months. But as of 2020, 83% of new mothers started breastfeeding, and at 6 months, 58% of babies still receive breast milk, with 25 exclusively. So that's a pretty big,
Wow. That's
right?
a big jump.
That's a
Wow.
big shift in these newborn trends. And I'm not, what I'm doing here today, I'm not knocking breastfeeding by any means. It really does have some research proven benefits, for both babies and moms. It is an amazing process. But I think what I've taken issue is that with this shift in these postnatal trends comes a lot of pressure to breastfeed, and sometimes not all the proper supports in place. And from my experience and those in my immediate circle, it can be a real source of mom guilt and create sort of this postpartum anxiety. Before my daughter was born, I kept hearing, you're going to breastfeed, right? Like it was an assumption. And that was followed by, don't worry, your body will know exactly what to do. Your baby will know exactly what to do. It's instincts. I heard that from my doctor. I heard that from the staff of the hospital after my daughter
Mm-hmm.
was born. I heard it from the pediatrician. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the only ones that were not saying that were my close friends and family. So there's definitely some sort of disconnect between the new mothers themselves and I think the healthcare professionals a lot of the times. Um, did you have the same feeling, cousin?
As you were talking, all I was thinking about was how was how when you are when you're in the hospital and after you have your baby, they automatically wheel the breastfeeding machine in. Like they have to. I mean, they're healthcare people, so they do need to do there's certain checks and balances. Like
Of
I get
course,
that.
of
I've worked in
course.
healthcare for a really long time. Like I get it. But there's posters everywhere and they bring it in. And if you say, no, I'm not going to do it, like I did for my twins,
Oh,
you kind of get the stink eye. I'm not gonna lie. With my son, I did do my due diligence. I tried, and I wanted to make sure he got that the I can't remember the colostrum. I'm not saying it right, guys. Listeners, don't get me for that one. That initial burst is very vitamin packed, and I wanted to make sure
the
all my
liquid
kids
gold
the liquid
colostrum.
gold. Yes, thank you. And that was important to me. I wanted to make sure they had that benefit. But with the twins, I knew I wasn't going to be able to breastfeed them. I already had a 1 year old. I had my twins. Like that was a lot on my plate already. And again, survival. I was like, I need to make this work for me and my kids. I'm gonna have to bow out of this. They'll be okay. Like I'll make sure I do everything else, everything I can for them. But yeah, so that's I was thinking all of that while you were talking.
Yeah. So we're here to tell you. And me personally, after 3 different consultations with lactation consultants, after a tongue tie release for my baby girl, and about a grand later, it's okay if breastfeeding doesn't come naturally and causes you stress. One of the first things that the lactation consultant said was breastfeeding is hard in the beginning, period. And if it doesn't work out, your baby will still be perfectly happy and healthy. And that immediately made me feel better, like immediately. I put so much pressure on myself in the beginning. I was determined to breastfeed my daughter. Being adopted as an infant, as you know, cousin, but for our listeners, it was just something that I was set on from the get-go when I found out I was pregnant. And we did it. We breastfed probably a little bit too long, but it came at a cost. It really created a lot of anxiety in the beginning, and those first 6 weeks were tough. It was so much work in the beginning. I literally feel like I didn't have a freaking clue what I was doing.
Yeah.
Was she getting enough milk? Was my supply okay? Is she positioned right? And that's all normal. I just didn't know it at the time because no one talks
Mm-hmm.
about it. No one was
Mm-hmm.
really talking about it at the time. But
Well,
there are thousands and thousands of mothers that feel the same way.
the
Um,
other thing I was going to point out just now that you lightly touched on is that you had there was actually a legitimate physical situation with your daughter that you actually had to get taken care of, and that's why
yeah, and
the
we found it
latching
by
wasn't
accident.
working.
We
Exactly.
we found it by
So
accident.
the reason why I want to point that out is because if you're feeling frustrated about something and you are getting a sense that, again, something is not right. I'm going to say this probably on almost every single podcast because I feel very strongly about this. You have to advocate for yourself, and in this instance for your kids, because if you sense that something is not right, I would bet money that something is not right, and and you innately know, and everyone will tell you no, you're crazy, but you need to dig in deep and you need to do what you need to do to get your point across, because people will always tell you you're crazy. Be crazy and make it happen.
Oh yeah. And like for any of our listeners out there, if anyone has to deal with what's called a posterior tongue tie, that that is very common in newborns, please DM us on Instagram because I will be more than happy to do that. But with your daughter, the same thing. There was something, and it was a simple. In my case, it was a very simple um, laser procedure where they just kind of clipped the tongue, and everything was fine. But you know, had I not done that, there could have been ramifications later with,
Mm-hmm.
solid foods and things that we easily avoided. But I've really had to advocate for my daughter and for myself until they realized, oh, you know what, you are right. Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
bad. Yeah, we'll get this taken care of, Um,
I,
But all of that to say, debunked, breastfeeding isn't always instinctual. And just from our two stories alone, cousin, you can hear that the breastfeeding journey looks different for everyone.
yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, if breastfeeding doesn't work out, it's okay. Um, this really hit home for me recently. The reason why I brought this up on this episode of the podcast is because my friend called me about 2 weeks ago, and for whatever reason, her baby is not handling her milk well, and she was like, "I have to stop," and she felt guilty. And she said, well, she called and said, well, you as a baby didn't get breast milk, right? And you were okay, right? And I immediately told her, yes, I did not, as a adopted infant, I did not get 1 ounce of breast milk. And I was a healthy, happy child who was completely bonded with my mother. So I wanted to help put that to rest for her. And I thought we could kind of do the same to anybody that's listening. But anyway, so please, my biggest tips for new moms when it comes to breastfeeding is one, get support, reach out. There are certified lactation consultants, usually through your hospital, your OBGYN, or your pediatrician that do take insurance, and vet them like you would any other professional, because some are absolutely amazing and some are and I wish I had done that sooner. Um, and also, either join a local breastfeeding mom group or you can join one virtually on Facebook, because you will see that you are not alone. When I tell you that there are thousands of women who feel anxious and unsure about breastfeeding, there really are. I didn't even know those existed until another new mom told me about them, but it really helped me feel better, that I was not alone, and that this whole newborn process, it was okay to feel unsure, you know. Um, and then lastly, I just want to say again, if it doesn't happen, it's okay. It's breastfeeding or not, it doesn't say anything about you as a mother. It says nothing about your bond with your baby, period. And I think that's something, that even though this shift towards breastfeeding is a good development for health
Mm-hmm.
reasons, it's we also have to play the flip side of that and say, you know what, though, if you give it a try, or if you decide not to, it's okay. It doesn't mean that you
Mm-hmm.
are any less of a mother.
Yeah, of course not. The benefits are real. Breast milk is
Yes.
amazing. It has healing properties. It's awesome. But again, if you can't do it, or you just can't feasibly wrap your head around it, okay, you're fine. It's okay. My kids were all bottle fed. They're all right. Um, they drive me crazy, but they're all right. Okay, I think we have time for one more, and I want to dig into this one a little bit. The next the next myth we want to debunk, is that your baby brings you closer to your partner. Now, before anyone gets too riled up, I want to provide a little bit of clarification here.
Yes, let's
Yes,
unpack that. Let's
yeah,
unpack
let's
that.
just let me pick this apart a little bit. Yes, after you have your baby, you will lovingly see your partner with your child and be overwhelmed with love for both of them. This happens to me consistently to this day. When I
Oh,
see my husband with my kids, it just brings up this just overwhelming feeling. I love
oh yeah.
that.
Yes. No, I can attest to that myself too, because I remember after getting after having a C-section, an unplanned C-section as well, cousin.
Hmm.
I remember Matt holding our daughter, and he was doing a lot of that heavy lifting the first day, obviously, and he just kept holding her in this loving embrace. And whenever I would see that, even to this day, I still picture that moment in my head, and your heart just bursts, right? With warmth. It's like that cliche notion. But those aren't the moments we're talking about.
No, we're not talking about that. We're not talking about those nice gushy. We're not. That's not what we're here for. We're not here for those nice. No, I'm just kidding. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is outside of those moments. Now, there was an article published in the Washington Post a couple years back that noted a staggering 67% of couples in a study reported a decline in their relationship satisfaction after the arrival of their first baby. The decline typically shows up between 6 months for women and 9 months for men after the baby comes.
Sounds about right.
Another set of research has found it was an online article, good2.com. New research had found a fifth of couples break up during the first 12 months after welcoming their new arrival. Among the most common reasons for separating were dwindling sex lives, which, I mean, obvious
Yeah.
reasons, a lack of communication, which is wildly rampant. And again, no one talks about it, and constant arguments. Now, it's not going to be everybody. Some people don't experience that at all. Some people will actually travel through that challenge together and it unifies them. That's amazing. But that's also not everybody. And what I want to bring to the attention here is while everybody wants to show that image and make it seem like everyone is going to go through this together and they're going to hold hands through the whole thing and there's not going to be any problems, that's not the case. And it's extremely critical to talk about this because you're going to have these dark times in that first year, couple years even, where it is hard. You are both sleep deprived. There's just so much going on. There's a lot of adjustments, and there's an actual legitimate physical adjustment in women's brains that happen after they gave birth. There's a study, and I'm actually kind of annoyed at myself because I did not have time to pull the actual study up to reference it. But there was an actual study done that took images of women's brains before and after giving birth, and it shows an actual physical change in a woman's brain. Now, this happens as a biological reaction to having a baby, and it adjusts the mother's way of thinking so that they can better care for their child. This adjustment does not happen to men.
Yeah.
So that difference alone is going to set you apart from your partner. And in times where you're going to be like, I don't understand why you innately don't do this. Well, it's because they don't have that physical reaction. It's honestly not their fault. And making sure that you know that, and anyone listening, if you've already been down this path, or maybe you're about to go down this path, I want you to hear this. This is like a something you can't control, and it's not your partner's fault. It's not your fault. This is just meant to happen this way. The best way to combat any ill feelings after you have a baby and all that happens is to take time to clearly communicate yourself and your feelings
Absolutely.
to your partner. You have to take that step.
Absolutely. And you have to remember also, this is happening during those months, especially where you're sleep deprived. You're adjusting to this new life, and you might not, like we said, because it's really not talked about, you might not have even been aware that this was going to possibly be a bump in the road.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember because, like I mentioned, um, during the PhD program, and then during even now during my postdoc stage, it's I don't have that typical 9 to 5. So my schedule was a lot more flexible. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember I would watch my husband go off, and he had to go to work, but he was able to kind of live that pre-baby life from 9 to 5, and walk out that door, take care of himself, focus on work, and then come back and then do the sort of fun dad things. And I remember feeling sort of this resentment growing.
Mm-hmm.
And the best thing I did was, instead of, just trying to swallow that and keep it to myself, I had a conversation with him, and we
Yeah.
talked it through. And that was the key. That was the key to not letting it fester and bubble over.
Yeah. And I was actually going to say that. I was extremely fortunate because my husband has a lot of wisdom, and he's very wise, and he brings a lot of communication to the table. I work in communications as a profession, so I already have my own set of communication skills, but he brought this wisdom to the table, and combining it with us learning these communication skills together as a couple and how we work together. And it helped so much, and continues to help to this day, because having kids is hard. My 6-year-old consistently tells me, "Oh, mommy, 3 kids is so hard." I'm like, you got that right. I'm like, and that's why it's very important, like, clearly communicating with your partner and taking into account, like, this isn't just you. And while we all have this problem now, and I'm going to call it a pandemic of social media, where all you see is the glitzy, glossy photos of everyone smiling, but you don't see the 150 photos in between where the baby puked all over somebody, and someone's crying, and somebody fell, and somebody's throwing a tantrum, and then you're screaming at each other, but then click, you smile. And then you go back into the mayhem and the chaos. Like, let's be real, people. Oh, that's like a thing, right? A be real. I have some friends that told me about that. Let's be real, people. Like, you don't have to be picture perfect. This is life. Life is messy and it's awesome. So just go with the flow, and like, just go with it.
And live in your moment. Don't live
Live in your moment. Yes,
not anyone
exactly.
else's moment, or not moments that you think somebody had because they're on a pretty picture in Instagram.
Mm-hmm. And one thing, like, I want to say, and I hope everyone takes away here, is you have to do what's right for you. I'm a big, like, survival mode person. You need
Yeah.
to do what's right for you, right for your kids, and right for your husband. At the end of the day, those are the only people that really matter. You have to take care of each other. So there's a lot to cover on the myths of motherhood. But our hope is that a little of what we have discussed has helped to bring some clarity and perhaps relief to some of you. If you think this information will help anyone you know, please relay the information or share the podcast. It's just very important to myself and Melissa that the word is spread out there. We're going to change the conversation here. We want to make this a world of difference for everybody out there to know that what they are going through is normal and they aren't alone. And maybe we can have some laughs along the way while we do this. Melissa, do you have any thoughts on key takeaways?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail again on the head. But we our whole purpose here is you are allowed to feel the way you feel, and based on your experience, more than likely this is a normal process. You're allowed to feel overwhelmed. Do not fall for that superwoman syndrome, and this applies whether you have children or not. The pressures that we put on ourselves, it's okay to feel overwhelmed. The pressures that society puts on us, it's okay to not be able to handle that all at once and with all of these different balls that you're juggling in the air. And again, going back to the topic that we've covered today, do not feel ashamed for your feelings after having a baby. And really, I think this is key. Talk to someone that you can trust. Whether it's a small group of friends, whether it's a family member, someone that you feel will place zero judgment on you. Have a real conversation. Talk about what you're feeling, because it feels so much better when you do, and give your time to adjust. Find your rhythm in your own time. A lot of what we talked about are these preconceived notions that everything is supposed to go smoothly immediately after the baby comes, and that you're supposed to know exactly what to do. Your body knows exactly what to do. And I think we've successfully debunked some of these things. And just give yourself that time to find your rhythm, because a majority of us really do. But I wish I had someone telling me what we're talking about now, because it would have been a much smoother journey.
Yeah, exactly. We really appreciate everybody listening today. We hope it brought, again, some clarity, peace of mind, maybe some laughs, I don't know, to some of you out there. Thank you again. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, guys.